Good day, learners! Welcome to Module 1 about the history and the theatrical forms and their evolution. Today's objectives are 1. Identify selected theatrical forms from different art period. 2. Illustrates the evolution of the theatrical forms of each art period. Before we start, let's have a pretest. In this activity, you have to match column A to the correct answers in column B. Write the letter of the correct answer in the space provided. You will be given 5 seconds to think of the correct answers. 1. Romantic period. 2. Medieval theater. 3. Greek theater. 4. Roman theater. 5. Renaissance theater. 6. Baroque theater. 7. Neoclassical theater. You have 5 seconds to think of the correct answer. Now let's check. 1. F. Melodrama and operas. 2. C. Puppeteers, jugglers, and singers. 3. E. Tragedy, comedy, and satire. 4. D. Combats and blood sports. 5. B. Morality plays. 6. G. Use of technology. 7. A. Grandiosity, highly elaborate. Now, let's have a recap and check your knowledge in our previous lesson. Can you still identify the name of the pictures and which era they belong to? You will be given 5 seconds to think of the correct name of each picture. Now, let's answer. 1. Colosseum. 2. Paris Opera House. 3. Parthenon. Now, let's start our discussion. Today's topic is about the history of the theatrical forms and their evolution. Let's begin. Theater began from myth, ritual, and ceremony. Early society perceived connections between actions performed by groups of people or leaders to a certain society, and these actions moved from habit to tradition, to ritual, and to ceremony due to human desire and need for entertainment. Theater means place of seeing, but it is more than the buildings where performance take place. To produce theater, a playwright writes the scripts, the director rehearses the performers, the designer and technical crew produce props to create the scenes, and the actors and actresses perform on stage. Then, it will only be a true theater act when audience witnesses it. Now let's talk about Greek theater. European theater began in ancient Greece. It began around 700 BC with festivals honoring their gods. Dionysus, the god of wine and fertility, has religious festivals called the Cult of Dionysus to honor him. The theater of ancient Greece is consisted of 3 types of drama. First, let's talk about tragedy. Tragedy, a compound of 2 Greek words tragus or goat and one meaning ode or song, was the most admired type of play. It dealt with tragic events and have an happy ending, especially one concerning the downfall of the main character. Thespis was the first actor and introduced the use of masks and was called the father of tragedy. Next, second type is comedy. In comedy, the plays were derived from imitation. There were no traces of their origin. Aristophanes wrote most of the comedy plays. And lastly, we have satire. These plays contains comic elements to lighten the overall mood or a serious play with a happy ending. This is a short, light-hearted tale piece performed after each trilogy of tragedies. The theater building was called theatron. These are large, open-air structures constructed on the slope of hills and consisted of three main elements: the orchestra, the skin, and the audience, just like what you can see in this picture. Now, let's talk about Roman theater. The theater of ancient Rome started in the 3rd century BC. It had varied and interesting art forms such as festivals, performances of street theater, acrobatics, the staging of comedies of Plautus, and the high verbally elaborate tragedies of Seneca. The usual themes for Roman theater plays were chariots races, gladiators, and public executions. The Romans loved a good spectacle. They loved to watch combat and admired blood, sports, and gladiator competition. The more realistic the violence, the more pleased Roman audiences. The Christians, however, opposed the barbaric themes of the plays and closed down all theaters. Comedy plays were popular too in the Roman theater from 350 to 250 BC, and women were allowed to perform. The Triumvir of Pompeii was one of the first permanent, non-wooden theaters in Rome, whose structure was somewhat similar to the Theaterthron of Athens. Here's what it looks like. The building was a part of a multi-use complex that included a large quadriporticus, a columned quadrangle directly behind the scene from an elaborately decorated background of theater stage, and is enclosed by the large columned porticos with an expansive garden complex of fountains and statues. Now, let's have the medieval theater. During the medieval era, theater performances were not allowed throughout Europe. To keep the theater alive, minstrels, though denounced by the church, performed in markets, public places, and festivals. They traveled from one town to another as puppeteers, jugglers, storytellers, dancers, singers, and other performers in other theatrical acts. These minstrels were viewed as dangerous and pagan. Now let's go over the Renaissance theater. Renaissance theater arts were characterized by a return of classical Greek Roman arts and culture. During the Middle Ages, mystery plays formed a part of religious festivals in England and other parts of Europe during the Renaissance period. Morality plays and university drama were formed to recreate Athenian tragedy. Public theaters were developed like Commedia dell'arte, Italian comedy, and a humorous theatrical representation performed by professional players who traveled in troupes, and elaborate masks, a dramatic entertainment consisting of pantomime, dancing, dialogue, song, and sometimes players who wore masks that were usually presented in court. The famous actor and poet who emerged in this period was William Shakespeare. He was an English poet, playwright, and actor, and was regarded as the greatest writer and dramatist in the whole world. His works consist of about 38 plays. Some of these plays were well loved: Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, Midsummer Night's Dream, Cleopatra, Julius Caesar, Much Ado About Nothing. For the first time, ballet was performed during this period. Ballet is a formalized form of dance which originated from Italian Renaissance courts. Now, let's discuss the innovation of stage in Renaissance period. First, proscenium was developed. This is the area of a theater surrounding the stage opening. Arches frame and divide the stage from the audience. 2. Backdrops for every scenery were popularized by the art of painting clothes. 3. Commedia dell'arte, or comedy of the profession was developed. It was quick-witted performance of the characters' players. Next, let's have the Baroque theater. The theater of Baroque period is marked by the use of technology in current Broadways or commercial plays. The theater crew uses machine for special effects and scene changes which may be changed in a matter of seconds with the use of ropes and pulleys. The theater was richly decorated. The multiplicity of plot turns and a variety of situations, characteristics of mannerism, a variety of approaches or intellectual sophistication as well as using artificial qualities of the play were succeeded by opera. The use of theatrical technologies in the Baroque period may be seen in the Vattel 2000, Farinelli 1999, and in the different stage productions of Orpheus by Claudio Monteverdi. Another is neoclassical theater. The neoclassical period was a movement where the styles of Roman and Greek societies influenced the theater arts. During this period, the theater was characterized by its grandiosity. Costumes and sceneries were highly elaborate. The main concepts of the plays were to entertain and to teach lessons. Stages were styled with dramatic arches to highlight the scenes. Multiple entry points on the stage were evident in many plays. Lighting and sound effects intensified the mood and message of each scene, enhancing dramatic experience. The concept of decorum, right and proper audience behavior, was applied in this period, which means classical concepts and appropriate social behavior must be observed. This period officially established just two types of plays, tragedy and comedy. Tragedy portrayed the complex and faithful lives of the upper classes and royals, while comedy tended to focus on the lower rungs of society. Let's now discuss the Romantic theater. During the Romantic period, melodrama and operas became the most popular theatrical forms. Melodramas originated from the French word melodrama, which is derived from Greek melos, which means music, and French drame. This is derived from the Greek dran, to perform. Melodrama, a dramatic work that puts characters in a lot of danger in order to appeal to the emotions and in which orchestral music or song was used to accompany the action. Opera is an art form in which singers and musicians perform a dramatic work combining text, libretto, and musical score. Acting, scenery, costumes, and dance were important elements of theater. Now, let's move on and talk about Romantic playwrights and composers. Victor Marie Hugo is considered as one of the greatest and best-known French writers. He was a poet, novelist, and dramatist of the Romantic movement. Among his works that stand out all over the world are Les Contemplations, La Légende des Siècles, Les Miserables, and the Notre Dame de Paris, which is known as the Hunch of Notre Dame. There are several playwrights that had been known in this period, such as Charles Nodier, George Sand, Heinrich von Kleist, Ludwig Uhland, and many more. Georges Bizet, a French composer and a pianist best known for his operas. Carmen is the most popular among his works. Bizet composed the title role for a mezzo-soprano in the character of Carmen. The opera tells the story of the downfall of Don Jose, a naive soldier who is seduced by the charms of the sizzling gypsy Carmen. His contemporary composers during the Romantic period were Franz Liszt, Richard Wagner, Frederick Chopin, Ludwig van Beethoven, Franz Schubert, Felix Mendelssohn, and Hector Berlioz. Now that we're done with our discussion, let's have an activity. This activity is called the Theater History Timeline. In this activity, you will create a timeline on the history of theatrical forms and illustrate the evolution of the stage. Decide on your timeline design. Now let's have a wrap-up activity. In this activity, you have to fill the chart with the theatrical forms of the different periods or eras in history. Briefly describe the theatrical form from each period. Now, let's ponder on this question. What do you think is the importance of theater in education? So before we end this lesson, let's have our post-test. Choose the letter with the correct answer. Number 1. A theater marked with the use of technology. A. Baroque theater. B. Greek theater. C. Medieval theater. D. Roman theater. The correct answer is A. Baroque theater. Next. During this period, theater performances were not allowed as people associated with theater shows are considered dangerous and pagan. A. Baroque theater. B. Greek theater. C. Medieval theater. D. Roman theater. The correct answer is C. Medieval theater. 3. The following are the types of Greek theater except A. Comedy, B. Romance, C. Satire, D. Tragedy. The correct answer is B. Romance. 4. During this period, theater was characterized by its grandiosity. A. Neoclassical theater, B. Medieval theater, C. Renaissance theater, D. Romantic era theater. The correct answer is A. Neoclassical theater. 5. Melodrama and operas became the most popular theatrical forms during this period. A. Neoclassical theater, B. Medieval theater, C. Renaissance theater, D. Romantic era theater. The correct answer is D. Romantic era theater. So that's all for today. Goodbye, and I hope you learned a lot in this lesson. Bye!